Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher. This is a podcast where mental health professionals talk about how they navigate their own mental wellness while working in the mental health field. Occasionally, I document my slow descent into madness while we have an authoritarian government overtake. Thanks so much for being here. I'm super stoked to have guests on the podcast and somebody who has run in a concentric professional circle as me, both as an LMFT and a religious trauma specialist. Super stoked for today's guest, Emily Maynard. Emily, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
I have several things because we have a lot of professional overlap that I know I want to get to, but I always start with the same question, which is, how is it that you came to be working in the mental health field?
Yes, I feel like I got here kind of from two different directions. One is education, because I've been working in the college and university system for the majority of my career. And then the other was through seminary. So I actually had the opportunity. I was really interested in this question of like, for a long time, obviously, because it was my own question, like, how do you have healthy spirituality after religious trauma or spiritual harm? That was a question that just fascinated me. And so I had the opportunity to start a program studying spiritual formation. It was at an evangelical seminary, but I was doing my best while I was there to find some like feminist interpretations of ancient texts and things like that. And it was during that process that I was like, oh, I'm glad somebody's doing this, right? Like, I'm glad there are theologians trying to bring, new lenses to ancient work and spirituality, but I'd rather just be talking with people.
Yeah.
So that kind of pointed my career in a different direction. And I went back to school for my MA in clinical psychology in 2016. So weird time to start a program on mental health.
Yes, for sure. And evangelical seminary, a weird place to try and learn about healthy spirituality.
I was doing my best while I was there. That's all I can say. And there were a few other people trying to do their best too. And, we all make mistakes.
I spent 5 years at a Christian college as an educator and progressive Christian, so I understand. What was the journey to the LMFT? And I will say, I'm going to caveat this because I'm not in California where you're at, but California, for all the other states, is considered the hardest for licensure. So I'm curious about sort of your journey to what was the draw for the LMFT and what was that like licensure like? This is for our listeners who are therapists and nerd out about this stuff, but you're licensed in multiple states. So I've always heard California is like the toughest one for that reciprocity. So I'm just curious what it's been like for you from that other perspective, licensed in California and then working your way out.
Yeah, but I didn't realize, because I'm from Oregon originally. I've only been in California for almost 11 years. I've been in Southern California. And in other states, like the license of LMFT can sometimes be seen as a lesser license. So I didn't realize it was so state dependent. But in California, that's kind of the central I would say like that's the most well-known, most respected, and legally that's the license that had the most historical like space to work as far as like diagnosis and what you're able to do with certain assessments, things like that. So it really is just state to state. And so once I realized that was sort of the best master's level license in California, most well-known, most connected with communities and insurance companies, that's the route I went. So it really is kind of state to state dependent. A few things that are unique. California has their own exams. They are moving now towards being able to accept national clinical exams, which is really helpful. And I think will open the door to just a better connection of the broader practice community, across the states. But you also have to do 3,000 hours before you can be on your own in private practice. So I know there's some states where if you finish your degree and you get, supervision, you are able to start your own business. But in California, you have to work for somebody else for the whole 3,000 hours. And that took me a little over 3 years because I was also working part-time in education, during my grad school and associateship. So it took
Yeah.
me a while. I got licensed in 2022.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that 3,000 hour thing it's just clunky for young therapists, whether it's not being able to open your own practice or having to be diagnosing under someone else's license. That's what it's like in Wisconsin. So yeah, it's not a great system, but who knows? We might be getting rid of all laws soon, and things
Yeah,
might.
I don't know. We could just be free. And, you know, we've seen how well that's going in the life coaching community to have no regulations around the profession, right? I don't know. I think it's
Yeah,
just figuring, like, I made the decision at the beginning. Like, I planned it out and I was like, oh, this is actually going to be a really long road. And then I just said, well, you know, I'm going to be doing something in 6 years. So it might as well be the thing that I actually want to do. And I chose to, you know, do a 3-year program instead of a 2-year. I took longer to get my licensing hours because I had another part-time job, and that helped sustain me financially. Like, I think it's an incredibly, or can be an incredibly financially exploitative system to
yeah,
be an associate or intern or whatever, you know, it's called in your state. But I think you just have to be really honest about that and try to work together, right? Collaborate and support peers.
yeah.
And if you need to go slower because you got to work another job, like, that's normal. It didn't make me a worse therapist, right? To take my time and to learn how to be regulated and do work at a sustainable pace. It actually, I think,
Yeah.
helped me.
Yeah, and there's a lot that's broken about the system. Like I agree with you. The Wild West of life coaching gives me pause, especially when making referrals or recommendations for people that like, hey, there's a lack of accountability there. And that's not to say that the route to licensure is like some golden paved pathway that's awesome and wonderful. Like, no,
Right.
lots of my episodes have had other therapists who burned out early in their career because where you get placed for your internship and your hours to get your hours are often unpaid, and like it is not a great or healthy system from that direction either. And I think getting licensed and having licensure is a helpful thing. Like I think that
Mhm.
accountability and that ability to have a board that people can make complaints to and have an ethics that you're committing to is important.
Yeah.
So it is a both and. I also don't want to propagate the myth that like California is hard to get licensed in. I've been licensed for, I don't know, I've been doing therapy for 16 years. So that might be an
Oh,
old
wow.
thing. So
Yeah.
I don't
I
want
don't
to
think it's
spread
like,
old information.
yeah, I don't know if it's easier or harder than anywhere else. I think it's just like, well, this is where I live, so this is where I have to get
I
licensed.
think I think it's that it has its own test that like test anxiety is so bad for people that it got a bad rap because you had to potentially retake a test. Uh,
Yeah.
and I can't speak for all test takers, but the LMFT exam I took was not that hard.
Yeah, I think it's knowing like what it's testing you on. It's nothing is testing you on how to be a good clinician or how to actually deal with real people. It's testing you on what are the state laws and how do
Yeah,
you like do these very specific practices that are specific to the test, but not necessarily specific to therapy. So you sort of have to like, I don't know, I had to set aside who I was as a therapist and
yeah,
just like learn how to answer the questions on the test, which is very silly, but that's the way it is at the moment.
yeah. Yeah, it's odd. What was sort of the vibe you picked up in your education regarding private practice and opening your own practice? Was that like a viable option? Was it something they spent a lot of time talking about, or was it just sort of like ignored and like you had to figure out how to do it yourself?
I don't think it was covered super well in my education. I mean, I think I went to a program that was kind of geared for people who are already working or doing a second career. It was an evening program. So I think more of my faculty were professionals who were teaching one class a semester. So I
Sure.
did think that helped. Like, I had one professor who was so great in one of our classes. She's like, she did a whole class basically on here's how my private practice finances work. And here's how to actually figure out, you know, what is an average fee? What does that actually mean if your business is bringing in that fee? Like, how much are you paying yourself? And so she kind of gave this model of like, you can set up a practice that is very simple and exactly what you want, and that can be ethical and a way to genuinely support the people that you work with and your own life and family and financial obligations. So I think about
Yes.
her a lot and how generous she was, and just being like, yeah, let's talk real numbers. Like, this is what my practice brings in. This is how much time I spend on it. So I knew I had that option for myself, but I think there was definitely a time when I got into the profession where I was like, oh, you have to contract with an insurance company, or and you have to sort of, do your time in certain mental health spaces. It's helpful that I already had a career. I
Yep.
thought initially that I would be a counselor at a college or university and work in those spaces. But as I went along, and sort of moved back into this space of trying to understand religious trauma, thinking of that as a clinical focus, then I was like, oh, I only want to be in private practice. And now I could never work for anyone else as a therapist again. Like, I am unemployable in that space. I'm too
Yeah.
persnickety about how I want my ethics and clients to like be treated.
Yeah. Yeah. And 10 out of 10 do not recommend working for a college counseling center. With so much
Yeah.
love in my heart for college students who need support for their mental health, I have I have never seen a college campus counseling center that was set up well. So,
Yeah. They could be out
and
there. I don't know.
they could be out there for colleges that bring in lots and lots of money. They still have really terrible ones. So my
Yeah. My
experience is,
college didn't have, there was like, when I was going to my undergrad, there was no college counseling center.
yeah,
There was like, a guy named Mike who had a little office downtown that you were allowed to meet with. And that was my very first
yeah,
experience of therapy. And it was really weird and not helpful. I think I only went once or twice, maybe. That was
yeah,
it.
yeah. And I can't imagine. I've been out of higher ed for a number of years now, but I can't imagine the model has improved as funding becomes harder and harder for colleges to come by. But yeah, that model of seeing a therapist once or twice and then getting referred out is at the Ohio States, is at UConn, is at the schools that have money that they could spend on mental health and are not,
Right.
let alone your little private institution, D3 Christian college, which is where I worked for a number of years,
Yeah.
constantly fighting for funding for mental health. So yes, I love that. But young, shout out to that teacher, that professor you had who was like real about it, because that I think is really wonderful. Back in the day, we had one class period on like what private practice could look like. And it was kind of like, it's really risky and you shouldn't do it because you're going to end up being poor. And so,
Yeah.
it's good that the profession is broadening that perspective a little bit. I think it is scary for newer therapists to think about jumping into private practice.
Yeah. I think it's really hard because we're seeing institutions crumble all around us, right? So when federal funding for mental health is being just, even grants that were awarded are just not being paid, right? You see that actually there's risk everywhere. You see large insurance-based practices like not being paid by the insurance companies, 90, 100, $300,000, and basically like going under. So it kind of feels like, well, there's actually no safe place to be. So where do I want to be? Because these
Yeah,
institutions are being targeted right now, and the insurance system is incredibly corrupt and non-functional. So maybe
yeah,
there's other ways to do this work that's like mutually sustainable.
yeah. Yeah, and I think again, like you talk about the ethics of how you want to run your practice, the ethics of how you would like your clients to be treated. Like when you get to set up your own practice, you get to do that. And yeah, that's really nice. I will say, for owning my practice for 3 years now, it's the most aligned I've ever been in my 16-year career because it is the way that I want to do it. And that business stuff is not as hard as people think. As somebody with ADHD who's not like a business-minded person, it's not that hard.
Yeah, therapy is a really easy business to run, and plenty of like unintelligent people are businessmen. Like you're smarter than Elon Musk. Like you could start a business. Bleep, you're smarter
Yeah,
than Bleep. All these guys, like you just have to learn how to do it and build the systems that
yeah,
work for you and your brain.
yeah, for sure. So my bias for private practice has come through strongly enough. Let's pivot a little bit. Working with religious trauma when the Christian right elects Donald Trump. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. It's so weird because I grew up like extremely fundamentalist and conservative and politically active. So what's so disorienting about this time is I'm like, this is the stuff that I was talking about with other homeschool conservative Christian teens in 2002 in state capitol basements with like the biggest weirdos you'd ever met in your life. We were doing mock
Yeah.
legislature and being like, eliminate the Department of Education, eliminate taxes, right? Like ban abortion and, eliminate. I mean, gay marriage wasn't even legal at the time, but we were like preemptively outlawing it.
Yeah.
Only judges have to swear on the Bible, right? Everyone has to be Christian. Like, it's just weird because I'm like, I'm not surprised by anything that's happening right now, which I think is a little strange. Like the people who are shocked, I'm like, no, this has been in the works for like a long time. Like the people who started this movement are, dead, but here are their ideas coming to fruition and ruining our lives generations later.
Yeah. And like some of the actors look different, but it is the same movement. I tend to go back to like Brown v. Board of Education. This is when the religious right became politically active because of racism. But like, we have different actors, but to find a Jerry Falwell Jr. picture with Donald Trump is not hard. Like some of this stuff has been passed down from family to family, and Project 2025 really like put it into 900 pages for anyone who wanted to read it, that this is what they wanted to be doing. What was sort of you were at a seminary, what was your deconstruction pathway sort of like? What did that look like? You went from being one of those lovable little weirdos who wanted to
just posted a picture on my Instagram of my like homeschool hair, which is what I call it, when I had hair like all the way down to my butt. Purity ring, like it's just my favorite picture of me. Like what a little sweetie. She just had no idea what was going on.
But very confidently outlawing taxes. Which is it's I love these conversations because I was raised fundamentalist, but like not politically active at all. So I was raised very conservative, but like politics was one of those like things you don't talk about, and like so the political marriage of the religious right always felt weird to me because that's not like the sect that I was raised in. So yeah, what was sort of that path for you to say, hey, maybe this thing isn't so great and it's actually harming people, and I want to work with those people that it's been harmful to?
Yeah, so I was raised incredibly fundamentalist, but my parents had some more progressive ideas, like girls can go to college and girls can get jobs, which is helpful because I'm the second of 6 kids and I have a lot of sisters. So I went to college and I was, went to a very conservative college, but it wasn't necessarily Christian. So I started just meeting other people there, right? I think one of the things that has changed me the most is just relationships with other people. So the first thing I did was sort of deconstruct fundamentalism and realize like, oh, the way that I grew up is actually just like a tiny pocket of people. It's not even representative of like Christianity. I mean, that was the first time I met Catholics and Orthodox Christians and like, non-Christian, that it was just such a really, it was still a sheltered place, but it was like an okay first step for me.
Yeah.
So when I moved back home after college, I didn't go back to the super fundamentalist, high control, quiverful church that my parents had raised us in. I went to an evangelical church that was more progressive, right? Like they had a woman on the pastoral team. They allowed a woman to speak occasionally about scripture in a sermon, and so it felt very progressive and like something I had to justify and kind of be on alert for. Like, are you gonna say like I'm already falling away that I'm going to a church where a woman is on the pastoral team, not an elder? Don't worry, she didn't actually have real power, but she had the title of pastor.
For people who weren't raised fundamentalist, that this does not sound particularly like progressive or transgressive. Like, I grew up in a church where women weren't allowed to speak at voter meetings. So like, this journey is a lot to like wrap your head around while you're going through it.
Yeah, the church we went to, like there wasn't a woman couldn't lead worship without a man. Like if she was singing, there also had to be a male singing, and she had to have specific approval from her father or husband to sing, like to be on stage, right? Just like
Yep.
leading the songs. So that was felt like a really huge step for me, right? Here I'm making my own choice about the faith that I have and how I want to practice it. And then it was actually on Twitter. I got on Twitter in 2009 and just started following conversations about the stuff I was interested in, which is like religion and politics. And came across people like Sarah Bessey, Rachel Held Evans, Matthew Paul Turner, people who were talking about their own lives and writing and engaging in public conversations around the idea of like complementarianism versus egalitarianism. Like maybe women do have spiritual power. Maybe it's not wrong to be queer,
Yeah.
and act on it, right? And that really changed me. So I started writing and participating in those conversations in my own way. And once you start down the slippery slope, like, oh, it's all good from there, baby. Like, then I was questioning everything, right? Like, what is this thing called virginity? Like, does it actually matter? You know, what else? I questioned everything. And that led me still in evangelicalism a little bit, but well on my way out of harmful religious systems. So I think seminary was like kind of the last stop for me. I was like, oh, I think this is really not my jam anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to that because when I took the job in higher ed at a Christian college, I was very like liberal, progressive Christian, but like that's when I was like, oh, I'm an atheist actually, by spending all this time around Christians who were far more conservative than I had been. And it was just sort of like, oh yeah, like I need to just leave is the thing. And that was, yep, I took that job in 2016. So yeah, it was a good time to be leaving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I sort of was able to continue, my career in higher education in a non-Christian school, and then becoming a therapist was like kind of my big change. And so I really wanted to focus on being a good therapist. I knew I didn't want to just become like someone who'd use my own experience primarily in my clinical work. So I kind of put everything aside, the writing and speaking that I was doing, and just was like, okay, just focus on being a good therapist. And I'm EMDR certified. So I really focus a lot on trauma. I mean, I work with plenty of people who don't have religious trauma as their primary concern.
Yeah.
And I think that helps that I'm not just only relying on my experience because it's just mine, right? Like I'm just one little person. I have no idea what someone else needs or which direction they want to go with their lives based on what I did.
Yeah. And one part of your story that I just want to highlight is like learning by being around other people. Like, that's not how I would normally define therapy, but that is a big part of therapy, is like joining with people where they're at, not having that expert mentality, but like, yeah, that people are the expert in their own life. And something like college, having different experiences, working with different people from different backgrounds, like that's a cool thing we get to do as therapists, but that's a big part of the learning process too, of learning how to be a good therapist, is being around these different populations and working with people and letting go of that, like I know things, and being open to connecting with people in order to learn things together instead of saying like I have the answers. And like that's really, that's one of those things that I reflect on is the antithesis to my fundamentalist upbringing.
Right.
Which was, there is a capital T truth, and we do have all the answers, so don't ask any questions.
Right. Yeah. It's so radically different to move into a space where I'm like, I literally don't know what your values are or what you want out of therapy. Like I'm here as a partner and hopefully to open some doors ahead of you so you can choose which one to go through. But that's something I always have to keep my eye on, because I think that, fundamentalists are like, I know what's best. I know what healthy living looks like. Some of that is just baked into, I think a lot of therapists are like fixers. We want to fix everything. We want everybody to be okay, right? But that can turn into narrowing our focus or feeling like there's only certain ways to be okay or only certain ways to live. And you learn that in school, and then the rest of your career is spent like unlearning that a little bit in practice.
Yeah, I think you learn how, and you spoke to this a little bit earlier, you learn how to be a therapist by doing therapy with real people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that anything in a classroom prepared me to be a therapist. My internship is where I learned how to be a therapist. Doing therapy in front of a one-way mirror where my supervisor could call in and ask questions is where I learned how to be a therapist.
Ooh, that's so interesting. That's such an intense way to learn, but I like it. I think, yeah, I think we certainly discussed cases and certainly had a couple observations, but I didn't have to do a ton of that, which was nice.
Yeah. And it wasn't fun. But like that is a model that I think I really respect for learning is the one-way mirror. And like I lucked into that again. It was not I didn't know what I was doing at 20, 21 years old when I was going to grad school. But lucky into that internship. How you're in California, how is having the niche of religious trauma work for you? I'm in the Midwest. It's a really tough niche to have because people aren't openly talking about religious trauma. What's it like being out on the coast and maybe having some of those more, a culture that's a little bit more progressive just based on geography?
Yeah, I mean, I am in a very red part of blue California, so it's a little bit strange. Like I literally got an Instagram ad the other day for a new church popping up in my extremely churched like city neighborhood in Orange County. Like Orange County is the birth of the mega church. So there are more, they're everywhere and they're popping up more all the time. And so I think there's a lot of people that I meet that maybe don't understand they have religious trauma. And that's why I think it's so important to do some of the public advocacy and education work like I do on Instagram and like tons of other creators do. Because I think that's the first place that people are often like, wait, what happened to me wasn't okay? Like, that's why I feel weird about this experience or this church or this group or whatever. So I think there's more and more language that people are coming to therapy, like looking for that. Which is really cool. And I think it just looks different when it's like a progressive evangelical church on the surface. And the kinds of spiritual and religious trauma that happens in those communities is really different. It's often a lot more, I'd say like it's a lot of social and relational trauma, versus like, oh, I grew up in the South and, my Baptist church has worked the same way for generations. Like it just looks different. So my goal is always to try to like explain the options and let people choose what they want to engage with.
Yeah.
But I also think I work with a lot of people who have gone to Christian higher ed or worked in Christian organizations, like a lot of mission driven, hopeful, all in kind of people experience religious trauma because those systems abuse labor or abuse identity or target people for, really kind of like core factors about themselves. And so we talk about religious trauma in those ways too. Like this isn't just, spiritual abuse. It can also look like burning out at a mission driven organization, not being paid enough and being, finding out later they had all this money to spend on other things, just not you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think it's like trauma writ large. There's all these different ways that people experience it, and two people can experience the same thing, and one has a trauma response and one doesn't. And so it's that added layer, I think, of, and a higher entity wanted it that way.
Right.
That can be really complicating.
Yeah. A lot of people who are like, well, what happened to me wasn't really that bad. I don't understand why my relationships and my anxiety and like all these things aren't working anymore because I didn't get, XYZ. They pick a scenario that's worse than theirs. So a lot of my work is just saying like, okay, well, if it looks like trauma, if it feels like trauma, if it's showing up in your life as the evidence of trauma that we have listed out in the DSM, like, let's treat it like trauma. Let's see how that works.
Yeah, right. I don't know what your caseload is like. I see a lot of people who have already started deconstructing or who have been out of the church for a while and are interested in sort of that rebuild, which is a thing I want to talk about.
Yeah.
But that a lot of old trauma is coming up because of the current regime. Like Mike Johnson, to me, is just like a perfect encapsulation of like a lot of people's religious trauma. You used the phrase quiverful earlier. Like it's not everybody's experience, but it is like sort of he's new apostolic reform, but like it is a lot of like what people I think growing up in the 90s and early 2000s would have experienced is like the stuff Mike Johnson is pushing.
Yeah. It's so strange because I know so many people who are working in this administration who are helping do these terrible actions, harming the rest of us. And it's really kind of wild to see the people who experienced the same upbringing that I did and went all in on it and are now the faces of the harm that they experienced as children and the perpetuators of harm on others. It's I don't want to recognize this many people in federal government or courts or press conferences. Like, I
Yeah.
wish I didn't know all these assholes and the way that they are like supposedly thriving. I don't know. I can't imagine that they're actually happy, but they're at least getting some of what they think they want, which is
Yeah.
it's weird and gross. I don't think that was your question, but that's where I took it.
Yeah, well, and right, but like it's interesting, I think, for people who sort of my question being people who have left the church or been out of it for a while, have done the deconstruction work, that like there's old trauma that's being triggered because of the current administration.
Yes.
And like, yes, it's fascist, and yes, like we should call it that, but like there's so much of the authoritarianism in this government that models what churches have been doing for millennia with fundamentalism and just that authoritarian leadership style.
Right. And for people that I talk with a lot, it's like about how their families were, right? They set boundaries or there were no contact or, their family has evolved in certain ways that they're able to be in some contact with them. So they feel like they escaped a fundamentalist family or like a weird church or subculture. And now it's just like happening on this global scale. And it feels like they can't escape at this time because it's impacting everything and everywhere.
Yeah.
And that I think feels like it's bringing up all those feelings of being trapped and observed and, afraid of
Yeah.
crossing the lines.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's our brain safety mechanism, right? Like a lot of times those trauma responses were a survival mechanism. And so they're going off again now. I don't think that's inherently unwarranted.
Yeah.
But
And why
learning
it's so
how to,
powerful.
yeah,
Why it's so powerful to, I think, let people who've, healed parts of their religious trauma or who experienced it and have rebuilt meaningful, community focused lives, like why I think we need to listen to each other right now, because I think there's a lot of ideas generated by the communities of people that escaped that we could use to push back on a national scale.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And this is like a bugaboo of mine, but also people who left the church but kept the system with them and like
Mhm.
calling that out when we see it, because I think that's also detrimental to people who are leaving harmful religious groups and then they find this seemingly supportive group that has a charismatic leader and they're not a pastor, but it's sure set up like that. And then we see some of these groups come and go, and it sort of follows some of those unfortunate systems that the church is built on.
Yeah, I think that's helpful for me because I've been kind of deconstructed, or we didn't call it deconstructing, but I've been in these communities shifting things for about 15 years now, from when I first joined Twitter and started, writing and communicating with people about this. And it's helpful that I don't feel like there's any. I feel like when it happens to a new group, I'm like, oh, there it is again. Right. I've seen the cycles of boom and bust of like, what's the new organization that's gonna save us, that develops the communities and the podcasts and the products and the events, and then something happens and the ways they handle it are still affiliated with potentially power and patriarchy or capitalism. And it's helpful. I don't know, that's why I've been trying to talk about like a huge part of, yes, you need to deconstruct fundamentalist religion and maybe your theology, and also patriarchy and white supremacy and capitalism. And the way to do that is to like not necessarily stay in deconstruction focused spaces, but like go read a bunch of books about American history that are written by Black people. Like go read a bunch of books about indigenous ecology practices. Like go dive into something that you weren't allowed to know about. Meet with people from other religions and find out what's important to them. Like and that is really helpful in like breaking down this idea that like evangelicalism is the most important religious movement and it needs to be recreated or preserved or made new in some way. Like, I don't know, there's just like actually a lot more stuff out there that's kind of cool. And maybe you should spend time focusing on that. And that might help heal some of the things that happened in evangelicalism or in whatever religion,
Yeah.
you experience, whatever high control religion.
Right. Yeah. And it's I say this often, like this isn't something religion created. Religion is taking advantage of some of these implicit biases in our brain, that in-group, out-group bias we're all wired to have, because at some point in our evolution it was helpful to have that then organized religion sort of makes really rigid and turns into this unhealthy thing. Like we'll see that in political parties, we'll see that in other movements. Plenty of people I work with will find other community and then run into some of the same rigid structures that they didn't like about their church, or some of the community that is only based on status of being in group, that becomes like really unhelpful if you want to question something or if you want to leave something. So again, it's not that religion created these things, it's just religion is really good at taking advantage of these things.
Yeah. Human relationships are really hard, right? They just are. Like it's hard to be yourself and connect with another person on a small scale in your family. Like we're so different from each other, and we have these like wounds or experiences that we carry with us that have shaped us in ways that, they just are. And it makes sense that those relationships continue to be complicated, even if you've left one particular group or church or ideology.
Yeah. And human beings are incredibly variable. So if we try and get 20 of them in a room to do a thing, that includes a lot of variables, let alone doing that at scale or doing that over time continually. Shifting to perhaps a more fun, hopeful topic. I know you've spoken about this and written about it, but like part of the work that you really enjoy is like the reconstruction, the building something new, finding a safer landing place for people. I come from the postmodern schools of thought around therapy, and so I love like meaning making and co-creating is a lot of the language that I use, and that is, I'm happy to deconstruct theology with people, but I think where it feels light and joyful in the therapy process is in that like finding a new community and building some of those spaces that feel authentic and healthy. So can you talk about that a little bit? I'm just throwing that out as sort of a general, like that part of the process.
Yeah. I mean, freedom from high control religion for me is just about like the ability to actually just be a person living a life where I'm not trying to earn some particular reward in the next life through my own suffering. I'm not particularly trying to like achieve anything great or world changing, like the things that I was taught as a young person, like these are the ways to be good. I don't have to do those anymore. So I get to sort of just be like, okay, I guess what do we make of life then? I think existential therapy and writers are really helpful in like dealing with those kinds of questions. And then just being able to move into a space where you do get to have your own values and religious practices. I work with plenty of people who still find religion meaningful, and they have a community or a church or a theology that they've rebuilt, and that just feels much healthier to them. And I want to make sure people have access to that. Like, I'm not anti-religion in any way. I'm anti-harm. The same way I'm not like anti-family. I'm like anti-family harm or family generational trauma being passed on. So I love the reconstruction process because I think it's just so varied and so creative, and a place where people get to just like try a lot of things, right? Like the one way to know, is this working for you, is to like get really into it for a while, see how that feels. Does it actually make your life better? And then being able to pivot, rather than this idea that like there's actually one right way to live and you must identify it and stay on that narrow path. My therapy training is an intensive in narrative therapy, which is out of Australia and is incredibly postmodern and collaborative and, culture and identity affirming, and is willing to deconstruct some ideas of white Western therapy and how those have been associated with patriarchy or capitalism or white supremacy. So like, that's my jam. I'm like, let's talk about what else you could be, right? If you don't have to be this, like, what do you want to be? And how can you explore those things in a way that benefits your life or follows your values? And then how do you still maintain relationships with other people who aren't in that space? Like, do a lot of work with people around family or, friendships, like faith communities that they used to be a part of. Like, how do you hold on to your own ideas and go spend a holiday with your parents? Like, that's like that is a problem for a lot of people. And how do
Yeah.
you prepare and recover and still hold on to the idea that, like, I don't know, these people are human too, and they're just trying to figure it out too. And
Yeah.
that's, hard to hold. And I don't think it has to be done in a way that is like putting people in harm's way. Like, I'm fine with, punching Nazis. Like, I think that's an important part of resistance. But also,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, how do you have a conversation with your dad when most of his conversations are with Fox News? Like, that's gonna be a tricky one.
Yeah. And again, I think as with a background in marriage and family therapy, like that's what I was trained at. That's what my license has always been. I've always been an LMFT. Like every November and December, what I talk about is family gatherings.
Yeah.
Like that's not you.
Yes.
Again, that's not unique to the religious experience, but I think it is. We see a lot of rigidity around it because I think the MAGA movement and Trump has really, like, again, just sort of crystallized a lot of that stuff. If you were raised evangelical, listening to Fox News is almost like very comforting. It's a fundamentalist stance that they take. So that does make things like conversation difficult, and prepping and planning, setting realistic expectations. What do your boundaries look like? How do you enforce them? Like that is a lot of the work because I think there's this rigidity that comes with it beyond just typical family dynamics, even though
Yeah.
most families have to deal with things like boundaries around the holidays regardless.
Yes. Yeah. I also want to normalize that. Like, I think it's easy to say, like, this is happening to me and only me, and I'm uniquely, like, I'm in unique pain, and like all pain is unique because it's what you're experiencing right now. But there's so many of us who are trying to navigate difference and tolerance and, limitations. And those things are always worth discussing and kind of adapting as you go. And
Yeah.
there's not a lot that fixes any of these things. So it's not like we can sell another quick fix to people. It's like, no, this is the slow work of reconstructing. Okay, this is who this person is. Like, this person in my family really is this way, really is saying these things, really does believe this. Like, how do I figure out if I want to be around them or not, and to trust
Yeah.
myself on that? How do I figure out like how to be around them if I'm going to make that decision? And how do I just be okay holding the grief of, like, oh, maybe you aren't with your family this year. Like, maybe you're with your friends this holiday season,
Yeah.
and that counts, right? Like, the idea of chosen family from the queer community
Yes.
is so vital, I think, in reconstructing what it looks like to have a healthier life after harmful religion or harmful, political kind of movements.
Yeah. And I talk about chosen family all the time. A big fan, big proponent. And I grew up with an idea of that. My brother is adopted. So I think like from an early age, I sort of normalized, like, you don't need to be direct blood related family of origin for someone to be your family. But also, yeah, the queer community, I think, again, like people have gone through this already and done a lot of the work. There are books on these things. There are ideas on how to find community and build community. I think it's one of those fundamentalist ideas to let go of for a lot of folks, is that like you don't have to come up with the answer. Like they wrote a book and you don't have to like treat that as a new gospel. You can just like take what you like from it and leave the
Yes.
rest. And like that's
Yeah.
very freeing and healthy and realistic. But
Yeah,
I love the community building. I love like it is freeing when you've been out of the church, and I have to remind myself constantly that like that's really scary when you first leave the church. It's like overwhelming. It's analysis paralysis because there's so many options all of a sudden.
right.
But it's such a cool journey to be a part of when you get to walk along someone who's doing that, and they find a community that fits for them, or they find a ritual that's really authentically meaningful for them, and they've maybe never experienced that before. And I was raised evangelical Lutheran, which is very dry and boring and not at all fun. We weren't doing any snake charming or anything in our churches. And like to have a ritual that you actually like emote in is very bizarre for some people. And so like I do a lot of work around ritual and like reclaiming some of that stuff that again religion didn't create. It just took advantage of that. Our brains are already wired for some of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Coming from more, I was in a lot more charismatic spaces, similarly high control, but yeah, like how do you handle emotions when you realize like some of your emotions were, I mean, I hate to use the word manipulated, but like emotions are always created when people are grouped together because
Yeah.
that's how our biology works. And yeah, you might go to a concert and be like, oh, this was actually as much fun and meaningful. Like I went to the Chicks concert a couple years ago for my birthday when they toured, and I had the best time. And I was like, this is what feels like church, like screaming "Goodbye, Earl" with a bunch of other like millennial women.
Yeah.
um, was like so. It just like filled up my heart in this way. Like that's such a religious like phrase, but I'm keeping it. And the getting to do that and choosing to say like I am going to have an intense emotional experience, and it doesn't have to just happen to be in a specific building or with specific worship songs or in a certain context. Like I get to make that sacred because it's fun and I love it. Is
Yes.
just like really empowering.
Well, and there's so many things that like you just use the word sacred, and that's one that I use a lot. And I'm just like, that's not a religious term.
Hmm.
And I think there's this like reclaiming of language that a lot of people experience. I had to go through that process. Like if somebody would have said ritual to me in like 2017, I would have been like, ooh, no, that's
Yeah.
church stuff. Yuck.
Right. Right.
Where now I talk about that stuff all the time. So I think it is, there's a lot to reclaim, even if it is a country song about chopping up an abusive boyfriend and turning him into jam. Um,
Yeah.
Spoiler for anyone who hasn't listened to the Dixie Chicks. Um, I didn't know they were still touring. I'm processing in real time the information.
They haven't been for a really long time. That's why I was so excited. Yeah.
What a blast from the past, hearing Goodbye Earl. Not something I
Yeah.
expected to come up on the podcast today.
It is my karaoke song. Not that I do karaoke very often, but it is like in my head, my karaoke song. And I think that says a lot about me.
Yeah. Well, and again, like music, I think is one of those really accessible things to people who want to experience some of these things. Like I will use the word manipulation. Like churches, liturgies are manipulative structures. Like they're designed
Right.
to get a certain response from people. I'm like, there are people who study that stuff. Like I'm not.
Hmm.
And so I think it's one of those things where like a concert can be really meaningful. And I see plenty of people who have that like, I thought this was the Holy Spirit, but actually I just like music. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
right. That's human. Like that's a normal part of the human experience. That's fine. You don't have to let go of that. That's not a religious thing.
Right. It gets to be both. Right. You can choose to say, I'm having a religious experience. Right. I think
Mhm.
there are, growing up Christian, like Christianity is always my first spiritual language. Anytime I engage with that, it means something different to me than when I'm engaging with a religious tradition that I'm not as familiar with. Like traveling in Spain, like I went to a bunch of churches and I was like, oh, I get this, right? I get the symbolism. Like this is familiar to me in a way that going to, a mosque or a synagogue, like, or, temple, like isn't, which doesn't mean it's more important overall. It's just like it's interesting to notice my experience of familiarity with these kinds of like symbols and language and structure of a building.
Yeah. Yeah. And like churches are awesome, I will say, as like architecture. I love stained glass
Yeah.
windows. Like it's a thing I can't let go of.
Right. The preservation of like human art. Like I think that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Buildings and objects, like so
Yeah.
interesting.
I personally get more from going in the woods and looking at tall trees now, but I still can appreciate a good stained glass window.
Yes. Own kinds of cathedrals, right? Like I think,
Yeah.
yeah, lots of
Yeah.
cathedrals.
Um, yes. There's so much more that we could talk about because so much of this is happening in real time. Um,
Yeah.
but we're going to wrap here soon. If people want to read your stuff, see your stuff, connect with you, how do they do that? Where do they go? How can they find you?
Yeah, the best way to find me right now is on Instagram. I'm at Emily Maynard LMFT. Um, I have a website, emilymaynardtherapy.com, and there's some maybe helpful blogs on there. I have one called How to Deal with Conservative Parents. You know, really traffic really spiked up there in November and it's continued to climb. So I think a lot of people are in that place, like, how do I deal with these people?
Yep.
And then one about healing from purity culture trauma. That's something else I'm really passionate about. Is like, how do you
Yep.
rebuild not just your ideas of like what do I want to do with sex and sexuality, but like, what do I want to do with relationships and people, and how purity culture limited those belief systems around, you know, achieving certain relationship statuses or seeing other people as some sort of reward for a good life. Like, I love deconstructing like those ideas. And if I
Yes.
write more about that, it's going to be on my website.
An entire topic we didn't even touch on today that would take multiple episodes to talk about.
Next time we can talk about
Yes.
it when they like, next time they outlaw, you know, uh,
Yeah.
abortion medication and miscarriage treatment, and
They overturned Oberfell. Yeah.
we're just screaming into the void preemptively.
Not to jinx it, but
Yeah.
yes. So we will have show notes. We'll have links to Emily's website and social media. And yes, like the blogs are great. Emily's been on other podcasts, friends of this podcast that she's been on episodes of other podcasts. So lots of good connections there too, if you're looking for listening to her talk about some of these topics that we didn't get to cover today. Emily, this was great. Thanks so much for taking the time
Thanks
and
so
joining me
much.
today.
Yeah, let's do it
And
again soon.
yes, and to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for tuning in again. We will be back next week with another new episode. Take care, everyone.